He rented a cabin for peace, but the Apache woman inside changed his fate forever. James had always believed that peace was something you could find in a quiet place. His life in the city was filled with constant noise, traffic, deadlines, and endless meetings. Every day felt like a race against time, and the walls of his apartment seemed to close in on him. Even on weekends, when the streets were slightly calmer, he could not shake off the feeling that his mind was trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts, responsibilities, and regrets. The thought of leaving everything behind for a while had been growing in his mind for months, and now he finally decided to act. He found a small cabin in the Arizona wilderness, tucked away in a valley surrounded by thick pine forests and rocky hills. The pictures online made it look like a perfect retreat. The cabin was rustic but cozy, with wooden walls that smelled faintly of pine and an old stone fireplace. It seemed far enough from the nearest town that he could finally hear himself think. The website said it was quiet, peaceful, and completely private. For James, it seemed like the answer to a prayer. On a late autumn morning, he packed his car with essentials: blankets, books, food, and a small notebook he had kept for years but never had the time to write in. The journey from the city was long. He drove past golden deserts, towering cacti, and endless stretches of open road. The further he went, the quieter it became. No honking, no sirens, no endless chatter from the streets, just the hum of the car engine and the occasional call of a bird. With every mile, he felt a little lighter, as though the weight of the city was falling away behind him. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, he arrived at the cabin. It was even more beautiful than the photos. The wooden walls were bathed in golden light, and smoke gently rose from the chimney of a neighboring cabin far in the distance. He parked his car and took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. For the first time in years, James felt a calm he could not remember ever feeling in the city. He stepped inside the cabin, letting the door close behind him with a soft thud. The space was simple but welcoming. A wooden table stood near the window, a few chairs lined up neatly, and a small bookshelf held a collection of novels and guides about nature and wildlife. The fireplace looked as if it had been used recently, the ashes still warm to the touch. He set down his bags and wandered around, touching the walls, the shelves, and the windows, as if testing whether the place was real. That night, James lit a small fire in the fireplace, the flames crackling softly and casting dancing shadows across the walls. He sank into a chair with a cup of tea, feeling a sense of satisfaction he had not known in a long time. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and in the distance he could hear the howl of a coyote. It was strange, almost magical, to be so close to the wilderness, yet so far from anything he recognized. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe deeply without guilt, without thinking about emails, bills, or appointments. But as the night deepened, James noticed something odd. The cabin, which had seemed so inviting, began to feel unusually quiet. Too quiet, even. There was a faint creaking above him, as if someone were walking on the roof or floorboards he could not see. At first, he dismissed it. Old cabins make noises, he told himself. It's just the wood settling, or the wind playing tricks. Yet the feeling that he was not entirely alone refused to leave him. Every crackle of the fire, every sigh of the wind, seemed louder, sharper, as if drawing attention to something hidden in the shadows. He shook his head and tried to return to his tea, but a small unease lingered in his chest. He moved closer to the window and peered out into the darkness. The forest was bathed in silver moonlight, the trees standing tall like silent sentinels. For a moment, he felt completely at peace. Then, a shadow moved across the clearing just beyond the reach of the firelight. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his heart skip a beat. He squinted, but the night seemed empty again. Shaking his head, he whispered, "I'm imagining things." Despite the unease, James fell asleep that night, curled in the warm blankets he had brought. The wind hummed through the trees like a soft lullaby, and for hours he dreamed of forests, rivers, and quiet mornings far from the city. Yet, even in sleep, there was a sense that the cabin held secrets, and that his retreat might not be as solitary as he had imagined. The following morning, sunlight poured through the windows, scattering patterns on the wooden floor. James woke with a sense of hope and excitement. He brewed a strong cup of coffee, opened his notebook, and began jotting down thoughts he had been carrying for months. Here in the stillness of the forest, he could think clearly. For the first time in years, ideas came naturally, not forced by deadlines or meetings. He planned to spend the day exploring the surroundings, collecting firewood, and learning the rhythm of life outside the city. As he stepped outside, James noticed the cabin's small garden at the edge of the clearing. Wild flowers, small herbs, and even a few vegetables grew there, tended with care. It was odd to see a garden in such isolation, yet it made the place feel alive, like someone had been living there recently. He knelt to examine the plants, brushing his fingers against the leaves. Each one was vibrant, nourished, and surprisingly well cared for. He wondered who could have done this. Perhaps a caretaker? Maybe the previous owner? But the feeling of someone's presence lingered. James spent the day wandering the forest trails, breathing in the scents of pine and earth. He felt free in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant calls of birds, and the whispering wind. He thought of the city, of the endless noise, and a wave of gratitude washed over him. He could almost imagine leaving everything behind permanently. Here, he thought, he could be reborn. As dusk fell, James returned to the cabin with a small bundle of firewood. The cabin seemed warmer now, more welcoming than the previous night. He lit the fireplace again, its flames reflecting off the walls in a soothing rhythm. He sat by the fire, reading a book he had brought along, and slowly, the unease of the previous night faded. He felt he was finally where he was meant to be. Yet as he prepared for bed, James could not shake a subtle, persistent feeling. Somewhere in the corners of the cabin he felt the presence of someone else. It was not threatening, but it was undeniable. He paused at the doorway, listening to the gentle creaking of the wood, the soft sigh of the wind. For a moment, he wondered if perhaps the cabin had always been occupied by someone living quietly, unseen. A sense of curiosity mingled with apprehension. And so, James drifted into sleep once more, unaware that this cabin which he had rented seeking peace would soon become the place where his life would change forever. The whispers of the forest and the soft creaks of the old cabin were only the beginning of an encounter he could never have imagined. A meeting with a presence as wise as the land itself, whose influence would shape his destiny in ways he had never believed possible. The next morning, James awoke to a soft, golden light spilling through the cabin windows. The forest outside was bathed in warmth, and the crisp air smelled of pine and wet earth. After a simple breakfast, he decided to explore more of the surrounding land. The trails he discovered twisted through dense woods, over rocks and along small, sparkling streams. He moved carefully, absorbing every detail: the sound of leaves rustling underfoot, the scent of wild flowers hidden among the trees, and the occasional splash of a deer drinking from a distant creek. As he wandered farther from the cabin than he had planned, James began to notice signs of recent activity, small footprints in the soft soil, the faint traces of a fire long extinguished, and the subtle arrangement of stones near the edge of a stream suggested that someone had been living in the area, not far from the cabin. At first he dismissed it, telling himself it was probably hikers or another traveler, but as he looked closer he realized the footprints were delicate, careful, and not like those left by hikers in boots. They were smaller, lighter, as if someone moved with great intention and awareness of every step. His curiosity grew stronger with each step. The forest that had felt empty just the day before now seemed alive with a silent presence. He moved slowly, trying not to make noise, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet attention. James paused near a bend in the trail and spotted a small clearing ahead. At first it seemed empty, but then he noticed movement near a cluster of rocks. A figure appeared, bending carefully over a small patch of herbs and wildflowers. James froze. The woman was older, her skin weathered by years of sun and wind, yet there was a grace to her movements that spoke of a lifetime of experience. She wore simple clothing made from natural fabrics and a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tied back neatly. She moved with care, almost as if she were part of the forest itself. James could not take his eyes off her. He realized he had stumbled upon someone who had been living quietly in the wilderness, close to the cabin, and possibly, he thought with a mix of awe and nervousness, this woman had been the reason for the garden he had noticed the day before. He stepped forward, trying to make his presence known, but the woman did not startle. She looked up slowly, her eyes calm and steady, meeting his gaze with a quiet intensity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. James felt a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. He had expected solitude, yet here was another human being, someone he did not know, but who clearly belonged in this place. "Hello," he said softly, unsure what else to say. The woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice gentle but carrying a depth that made James pause. It was not a greeting in the ordinary sense. It was a statement that acknowledged more than just his presence. It seemed to recognize his journey, his intentions, and perhaps even the turmoil he carried within him. I rented the cabin," James stammered. "I didn't realize anyone else was here." She shook her head slowly. "The land does not belong to anyone, young man. We only walk here for a while and then we leave, but the land remembers." Her words felt heavy with meaning, as if she were speaking not just about the cabin, but about life itself. James felt a shiver run down his spine, a mix of wonder and unease. The woman introduced herself as Ayana. She explained that she had lived in these woods for many years, practicing traditional ways of living with the land. She tended to the plants, foraged for food, and learned from the forest as her ancestors had taught her. James listened, fascinated. There was a quiet wisdom in her speech, a calm that seemed to settle the restless thoughts he had carried from the city. She did not demand anything of him, nor did she judge his presence. She simply existed in a way that made him feel both small and important at the same time. Over the next hours, James followed Ayana through the clearing and into a nearby grove where she showed him how to identify edible plants, how to read the tracks of small animals, and how to move silently through the forest without disturbing it. She explained that the land had lessons to teach those who paid attention, and that every living thing, from the smallest insect to the tallest tree, had a role and a story. James tried to absorb everything, but he realized quickly that this was not a subject one could learn from a book. It was something one had to experience and feel with the heart. As they returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, James noticed how different it felt now. What had seemed like an ordinary retreat was now alive with history, memory, and the presence of someone who understood it in a way he never could. Ayana moved around the cabin with ease, gathering herbs and arranging them near the fireplace. She prepared a simple meal of corn, beans, and roasted vegetables and invited James to share it. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind through the trees. James felt a mixture of emotions. On one hand, he was thrilled to have found someone so wise and connected to the land. On the other, he felt a strange uncertainty. He had come seeking solitude, peace, and a break from the world. But now he realized that true peace might require understanding, humility, and openness to experiences he had not anticipated. Ayana did not ask questions about his past life. She did not probe for details of his city existence. Yet he felt that she understood him better than anyone else ever had, simply because she listened to the world, and not just the words spoken. Night fell, and the forest outside the cabin was alive with sounds. Owls calling to each other, the rustle of nocturnal animals, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. James and Ayana sat near the fire. She told stories of her ancestors, of the Apache people who had lived in harmony with this land for generations. Her tales were not just history, they were lessons, woven with care and attention, each one highlighting the importance of respect, patience, and mindfulness. As James listened, he felt a shift within himself. The stress, the noise, and the constant hurry of city life seemed distant, almost unreal. Here, in this cabin with this woman who seemed to carry centuries of wisdom, he began to understand what it meant to slow down and truly notice life. He realized that the solitude he had sought might have been incomplete without the guidance of someone who could teach him how to inhabit it fully. Later, as James prepared to sleep, he felt a mixture of gratitude and wonder. He realized that his decision to rent the cabin had led him to something far greater than peace. It had led him to a teacher, a guide, and perhaps a friend who would change the way he viewed the world. The quiet presence of Ayana, the wisdom she shared, and the connection to the land around him were more profound than anything he could have imagined. And yet, James could not predict what the coming days would hold. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, subtle but undeniable, as if the forest itself had plans for him. The quiet creaks of the cabin, the whispers of the wind, and the shadows of the trees all seemed to suggest that this encounter was only the beginning of a journey that would transform him in ways he could not yet see. That night, he lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the wilderness and feeling a strange peace he had never known. For the first time in years, he was not running from anything. He was not chasing deadlines or worrying about responsibilities. He was simply present, aware, and open to whatever lessons the forest and the woman in the cabin had to offer. The solitude he had sought had found him, but it was richer, deeper, and more meaningful than he had imagined, because it was shared, not with another city dweller, but with someone who belonged to the land in a way that spoke of eternity. By morning, James knew his life was changing. The cabin was no longer just a place to escape. It had become a classroom, a sanctuary, and a gateway to understanding a way of life he had never known. Ayana had opened the door to a world beyond his understanding, a world where silence spoke louder than words, and where wisdom was measured not by what one owned, but by what one observed, respected, and carried within the heart. And so James remained, eager to learn, to listen, and to begin the slow, transformative process of living fully in a way the city had never allowed him. The cabin, once a simple escape, had become the threshold to a life he could never have imagined, and the woman who lived there had unknowingly taken the first step in changing his fate forever. James had been at the cabin for several days, and each day brought him new discoveries about the land and himself. The forest was no longer just a beautiful backdrop. It had become a teacher. With Ayana by his side, he began to understand the subtle rhythms of life that he had never noticed before. The birds did not just sing, they communicated. The wind was not just a sound, it carried messages about the coming weather. The trees were not simply tall plants, they were living beings, rooted in a history far older than anything James had known. Ayana taught him to observe quietly. To understand, she said, you must listen with more than your ears. You must listen with your eyes, your heart, and your mind. At first, James struggled. He was used to rushing, solving problems quickly, and demanding results. Patience was not his strength. But as he followed her through the forest, kneeling to study plants, examining animal tracks, and waiting silently for hours just to hear the soft rustle of life around him, he felt a change beginning inside. One afternoon, she led him to a small clearing where wild herbs grew abundantly. These herbs can heal, she explained. Some soothe pain, some calm the mind, and some strengthen the body. But the most important lesson is knowing when to use them and when to let nature take its course. She showed him the subtle differences between leaves, flowers, and stems, teaching him how to harvest them respectfully so the plants could continue to grow. James listened intently, taking notes in his notebook, though he realized that no notes could truly capture the knowledge she shared. It was something he had to feel and experience. As the days passed, James began to notice changes in himself. The anxiety that had followed him from the city began to fade. His thoughts, once constant and chaotic, slowed down. He could focus on a single task for hours without distraction. He felt stronger, more capable, and surprisingly patient. The forest, the work, and Ayana's guidance had taught him that life did not have to be a constant race. There was value in slowing down, in observing, and in learning from the world around him. Yet, not every day was easy. One morning, a storm rolled in, dark and heavy, bringing strong winds and cold rain. The trails became muddy, streams swelled, and the forest seemed transformed into a place of challenge rather than comfort. James realized that the wilderness was not just a peaceful retreat, it could also be harsh and demanding. He followed Ayana as she moved through the rain with remarkable skill, gathering firewood and checking on the cabin's structure. He tried to help, but he struggled with the mud, the slippery rocks, and the weight of the soaked wood. "Patience," Ayana said calmly, handing him a bundle of sticks. "The storm tests you, not to punish you, but to teach you." At first, James was frustrated. In the city, challenges were solved with quick thinking and action, but here his strength and speed were not enough. He realized that to succeed, he needed to observe, adapt, and listen, not just act. Slowly, he began to understand. He watched how Ayana moved, how she shifted her weight, how she chose paths that were safe even in the worst weather. He learned that knowledge and wisdom could be as powerful as strength. After the storm passed, the forest was transformed. Puddles reflected the sky, fallen leaves glistened with raindrops, and the air smelled of fresh earth. James felt a sense of accomplishment and humility. The storm had been difficult, but it had also taught him resilience. He realized that life, like the forest, could be unpredictable, and that the challenges he faced were not meant to break him, but to prepare him for understanding and growth. One afternoon, while exploring a narrow canyon near the cabin, James noticed a small rabbit caught in a tangle of branches. It struggled, panicked, and looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Without thinking, he rushed forward to free it, but Ayana stopped him with a gentle hand. "Wait," she said. "Ah, sometimes helping too quickly can harm more than it heals. Watch first." understand what the creature needs. James froze, unsure how to respond. He watched as Ayana carefully guided the branches apart, letting the rabbit move freely without causing it harm. The animal ran into the forest, and James felt a surge of respect, not just for the rabbit, but for the patience and understanding Ayana had shown. That evening, as they sat by the fire, James reflected on what he had learned. He realized that patience, observation, and understanding were skills he had never valued before. In the city, success had always meant speed, efficiency, and control. Here, he discovered that true strength could also come from gentleness, attentiveness, and trust. He began to see that life was not about conquering the world, but about moving with it, learning from it, and respecting it. Ayana noticed the change in him. "You are learning," she said softly. "Not just about the forest, but about yourself. The land mirrors our hearts. If you rush, you will stumble. If you listen, you will find your path." James nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. He realized that his journey was not only about surviving in the wilderness, but about discovering a part of himself that he had long ignored, a part that could be patient, aware, and connected to the world around him. The days grew longer, and James began to take on more responsibility. He helped with cooking, gathering firewood, and maintaining the cabin. He learned how to make simple repairs, how to preserve food, and how to track changes in the weather. Ayana encouraged him to try things on his own, guiding him gently but allowing him to make mistakes and learn from them. Each success gave him confidence, and each mistake taught him humility. He began to understand that growth was not a straight path, but a series of lessons, small and large, that shaped who he was becoming. One morning, Ayana took him to a quiet part of the forest where a small spring bubbled up from the rocks. "This water has flowed for generations," she said. "People have come here to drink, to reflect, and to remember. Water carries memory. It reminds us of where we come from and where we are going." James knelt beside the spring, cupping the clear, cold water in his hands. He drank slowly, savoring the taste, and felt a strange sense of connection, not just to the land, but to history, to life, and to the countless beings who had passed through this place before him. Over time, James realized that Ayana's teachings went beyond survival skills. She was teaching him how to live with awareness, humility, and respect. Each plant, each animal, each stone held lessons, and she had the ability to make him see them. He began to notice the subtle signs of the forest, the way birds would fly before a storm, the scent of flowers that signaled rain, and the footprints of animals that told stories of their lives. Life had a language, and she was teaching him to understand it. Yet, even with all these lessons, James sometimes struggled. There were moments when the solitude and silence felt overwhelming. At night, when the wind whistled through the trees and the cabin creaked under its own weight, he would lie awake, missing the noise and distractions of the city. But Ayana never judged him. She simply reminded him to breathe, to observe, and to be present. Slowly, he learned to embrace the quiet, to let it wash over him, and to find comfort in the stillness. By the end of the third week, James felt a transformation within himself. He was no longer the anxious, restless man who had arrived at the cabin seeking a break from life. He had begun to understand patience, resilience, and the beauty of simplicity. He had learned to observe without judgment, to listen without distraction, and to respect the rhythms of life around him. Ayana's guidance had opened his eyes to a new way of living, one that was slow, deliberate, and deeply connected to the world. As he sat by the fire one evening, watching the flames dance, he realized that this journey was only beginning. The lessons he had learned were powerful, but he knew that deeper challenges and greater insights awaited him. The forest had tested him with storms, animals, and the demands of survival, but it had also rewarded him with knowledge, confidence, and a new sense of purpose. James understood now that peace was not a place, it was a practice, a way of moving through life with awareness, respect, and patience. And so, James prepared himself for what was to come. He knew that the wilderness held more lessons, that the forest would continue to test him, and that Ayana's teachings were only the beginning of a journey that would change him forever. He no longer sought peace merely as an escape. He was learning to live in it, to embody it, and to carry it with him wherever he went. The cabin, the forest, and the woman who had taken him under her guidance were becoming the foundation of a new life, one rooted not in fear, stress, or control, but in understanding, humility, and the quiet strength of patience. The days at the cabin had grown longer and fuller. James had settled into a rhythm with the forest, the cabin, and Ayana. He felt more confident, more patient, and more connected to the land than he had ever imagined possible. But the forest, as he was beginning to understand, was not always gentle. It had its own lessons, and sometimes those lessons came in the form of challenges that tested every skill he had learned. One morning, the sky was unusually dark for early autumn. The clouds hung low, heavy with moisture, and the wind whispered warnings through the trees. Ayana noticed it immediately. "A storm is coming," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We must prepare." James nodded, his heart quickening with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He had weathered small storms before, but this one felt different, almost ominous. They worked quickly, securing firewood, checking the roof for loose boards, and bringing water from the spring to store inside the cabin. Ayana moved with precision and ease, while James tried to keep up, realizing that even with all his lessons, he still had much to learn. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sharp, and soon the storm was in full force. Rain pounded the roof and walls of the cabin. The wind howled through the trees, and the forest seemed alive with the raw power of nature. James felt a surge of fear he had not experienced in weeks. The cabin shook with the wind. Branches scraped against the windows, and the sound of distant trees falling echoed through the valley. He looked at Ayana, expecting worry, but she remained calm, her presence steady and reassuring. "Do not fear the storm," she said. "It is testing you. It is teaching you. Trust what you have learned." Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. The forest trails were flooded, streams swelled, and the land seemed transformed into a place both beautiful and dangerous. Ayana decided they needed to check the nearby ridge to ensure no trees had fallen dangerously close to the cabin, and to gather additional supplies. James hesitated, worried about navigating the slippery terrain, but she gave him a patient smile. "You must face this," she said. "Do not run from it. You will learn by moving through it, not by hiding." Together, they ventured into the rain-soaked forest. James struggled with every step. Mud clung to his boots, rocks were slippery, and the wind threatened to push him off balance. Each step required focus, care, and trust in his own body and instincts. Ayana moved ahead, her movements effortless and confident, a silent guide through the chaos of the storm. James felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. He wanted to be as skilled, as calm, as capable as she was, but he realized that every lesson he had learned would now be tested. At the ridge, they discovered a large tree had fallen, blocking part of the trail and threatening to fall further. Ayana studied it carefully, assessing how to move it safely. "We must work together," she said. "You must listen, not just act. Trust your hands, your eyes, and your mind. They lifted smaller branches, tied ropes around the larger ones, and carefully shifted the tree so it would not harm the forest or themselves. James felt his muscles ache, his mind racing, but he also felt a deep satisfaction. This was a challenge unlike anything he had faced in the city. Here, every action mattered, and every decision carried weight. After they returned to the cabin, soaked and exhausted, Ayana taught him how to prepare a warm meal even in the wet conditions. They lit the fireplace, which sputtered in the damp air, and she guided him in making a simple stew from the preserved vegetables and herbs they had gathered. James had learned more than just survival skills. He had learned resilience, patience, and the importance of focus. The storm had forced him to apply everything he had been taught, and he realized how far he had come since arriving at the cabin. But the real test came the following day. The storm had caused minor flooding in parts of the forest, making the trails treacherous. Streams overflowed, paths disappeared under mud, and rocks were slick with water. Ayana decided they needed to check the perimeter of the land and ensure that nothing was damaged. James felt a nervous excitement. He knew this would be a moment where his growth would be measured. As they navigated the slippery slopes, James slipped on a moss-covered rock and nearly fell into a rushing stream. Ayana reached him immediately, steadying his arm and guiding him back to safer ground. "You must learn to move with the land, not against it," she said softly. "Trust yourself, trust the forest." James took a deep breath and tried again, this time focusing on balance, rhythm, and careful observation. Slowly, he began to move with more confidence, realizing that fear could be managed with attention and trust. Later, they came across a narrow ravine that had been created by the storm. The water rushed quickly, too fast to cross by jumping. Ayana studied it and pointed out a series of rocks and fallen branches that could serve as stepping stones.
"Follow my lead," she said.
"One step at a time. Keep your mind clear and your heart calm." James followed carefully, feeling his muscles tense with each step. The sound of rushing water filled his ears, but he focused only on the path ahead, trusting Ayana's guidance. By the time he reached the other side, his heart was racing, but a sense of triumph and accomplishment filled him. That evening, they returned to the cabin exhausted, but exhilarated. James realized that the storm had been more than just a weather event. It had been a mirror of life itself. Challenges would come, sometimes without warning, and the only way to succeed was to remain calm, observant, and adaptable. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. Trust, he realized, was not given lightly. It was earned through experience, patience, and attention. Ayana sat beside him by the fire, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You have done well," she said. "You have faced the storm not just with your hands, but with your mind and your heart. This is the lesson of the forest." Life will always test you, but it also provides guidance if you are willing to see it. James nodded, feeling a deep gratitude for her teachings. He understood now that the forest, the storm, and Ayana's guidance were shaping him into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than he had ever been. The following days were quieter but still full of lessons. James helped repair minor damage caused by the storm, reinforced the cabin, and practiced moving silently through the forest. Each day brought new insights: how to read animal tracks, how to predict weather patterns, and how to move in harmony with the land. The confidence he gained was not just physical, it was mental and emotional as well. He no longer feared the unknown. He faced it with patience, observation, and trust. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, James reflected on his journey. He had come to the cabin seeking peace, But the peace he had found was more than solitude. It was a peace that came from understanding, from resilience, and from the courage to face challenges rather than avoid them. The forest had tested him, and he had risen to the test. The storm, the slippery trails, and the rushing streams were not obstacles to escape, but lessons to embrace. Ayana watched him thoughtfully. "You are learning," she said, "not only about the land, but about yourself. Courage, trust, patience, these are not gifts, they are skills, and they grow only when you face the challenges before you." James felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. He realized that every fear he had conquered, every careful step he had taken, and every moment of observation had brought him closer to understanding who he truly was. That night, James lay in bed listening to the calm after the storm. The forest, once wild and threatening, now felt like an ally. He felt a deep connection to the land, to Ayana, and to himself. He understood now that life's storms were inevitable, but the lessons they carried were invaluable. Strength was not just physical, courage was not just brave action, and trust was not given freely. It was built through experience, awareness, and the willingness to face uncertainty with an open heart. And so, James slept with a sense of accomplishment and hope. He knew that the challenges he had faced were only part of a larger journey. The forest, the storm, and Ayana's guidance had prepared him, but more lessons awaited. He was ready, stronger and wiser, to meet whatever trials lay ahead. The cabin had become more than a retreat. It was now a place of transformation, where fear could be faced, courage could be learned, and trust could be earned. The wilderness had tested him, and he had begun to understand what it truly meant to live fully and with awareness. The mornings at the cabin had begun to feel different to James. Each day no longer carried the weight of expectation or anxiety. Instead, he awoke with a quiet anticipation, eager to learn more from the land, from Ayana, and from the stillness that now felt alive around him. The forest, which had once seemed like an endless expanse of unknowns, now felt familiar, almost like an old friend who had patiently waited for him to understand its language. James had changed. He realized this in small, quiet ways at first. He moved with a confidence that had been absent when he arrived. He noticed the subtle signs of weather, animal movement, and the growth of plants. He had learned to cook over an open fire, to gather water safely, and to care for the cabin without hesitation. But most importantly, he had learned patience, observation, and the importance of living in harmony with the world around him. He had grown stronger not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. One crisp morning, Ayana suggested they hike to a hidden ridge she had called the Place of Reflection. It was a long trek through thick forest and rocky slopes, and James felt a mixture of excitement and challenge. As they climbed, she reminded him, the journey is as important as the destination. Watch the land, listen to the wind, and be aware of yourself as you move. James nodded, realizing that these words applied not just to the hike, but to everything he had experienced at the cabin. The climb was steep and demanding, yet James struggled at times, his muscles aching, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Ayana moved ahead with ease, occasionally turning to offer a guiding hand or gentle advice. "Feel the rhythm of your steps," she said. "Move with the land, not against it. Life is much the same." James took her advice to heart. Instead of forcing his body, he adjusted, slowed down, and began to notice the small details around him. A bird's nest tucked in the branches, the smell of damp earth, the way sunlight filtered through the trees in golden patterns. By mid-morning they reached the ridge. The view took James's breath away. The forest stretched endlessly below, the mountains rising in the distance, and the sky painted in shades of blue and gold. A small stream trickled down the rocks nearby, reflecting the sunlight like scattered diamonds. The ridge felt sacred, untouched, and timeless. Ayana sat quietly, closing her eyes and breathing deeply. James joined her, feeling the calm energy of the place wash over him. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of the lessons he had been learning. The forest had taught him patience, the storm had taught him courage, and Ayana had taught him trust. But now, standing on the ridge, James realized that the greatest lesson of all was understanding himself. He had come to the cabin seeking peace, but he had found transformation. He was no longer the anxious, restless man who had arrived weeks earlier. He was someone who could face challenges, embrace uncertainty, and move through life with awareness and respect. As they sat in silence, Ayana began to speak. "James, you have learned much, but the land still has more to show you. Life is full of trials, yet it is also full of beauty. The forest mirrors the heart. If your heart is open, you will see the truth of the world. If it is closed, you will see only what you fear." James listened, absorbing every word. He realized that she was speaking not only about the forest, but about life itself. He had been given a rare opportunity to see life in its purest form and to learn lessons he could carry forever. They remained on the ridge for hours, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and feeling the gentle breeze against their skin. James noticed a sense of peace unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not the quiet of solitude alone, but the quiet that comes from understanding, from connection, and from being fully present. He had learned to listen, to the land, to others, and most importantly, to himself. And in that listening, he had discovered clarity, courage, and an inner strength that would guide him for the rest of his life. As the day progressed, they descended back toward the cabin. The walk was slower, more deliberate. James noticed things he had overlooked before: the intricate patterns of leaves, the way sunlight sparkled on wet stones, the faint tracks of animals that had passed through during the storm. Every detail seemed important now, every moment precious. He realized that life, like the forest, was made up of countless small events, each carrying meaning if one only paid attention. That evening, Ayana and James prepared a simple meal together. The fire crackled warmly, and the aroma of herbs and roasted vegetables filled the cabin. They ate in companionable silence, both aware of the growth and understanding that had developed between them. James felt gratitude not only for the skills he had learned, but for the presence of Ayana, whose guidance had been patient, wise, and unwavering. He realized that the cabin, the forest, and the woman who had become his teacher had reshaped his life in ways he could never have imagined. After dinner, they sat near the fireplace, the night outside dark but serene. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sense of continuity in life. James reflected on how much he had changed since his arrival. He had faced fear, embraced patience, learned to trust, and discovered a deep connection to the land. His journey had been difficult, but it had been transformative. He understood now that true peace was not found in escape, but in learning, growing, and embracing life fully. Ayana spoke softly. "James, you have done well. You have faced challenges, listened to the land, and learned its lessons. But remember, transformation is ongoing. Life will continue to test you, even after you leave this place. The strength you have gained here will guide you, but you must carry it with awareness and respect." James nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. He knew that the lessons of the cabin would remain with him long after he returned to the city. Over the next few days, James continued to prepare for his eventual departure. He helped organize the cabin, gather firewood, and ensure that the land was respected and cared for. He knew that leaving would not be easy, but he also understood that he was ready to face the world outside with a new perspective. The city would never be the same to him. He had been changed in ways that no office building or street could undo. On the final morning, James and Ayanna stood outside the cabin, taking in the view one last time. The forest stretched endlessly, alive with sounds and movement, yet calm and eternal. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the land, the lessons, and the woman who had guided him through his transformation. Ayanna looked at him with a gentle smile. "Remember, James, the forest is not just here," she said. "Its lessons are within you. Carry them and you will never be lost." James took a deep breath, feeling the cool, crisp air fill his lungs. He understood now that the cabin had been more than a place of solitude. It had been a place of awakening. He had arrived seeking peace, but he was leaving with wisdom, strength, and a profound understanding of life and himself. He knew that the journey would continue, but he also knew that he was ready. As he drove away from the cabin, leaving the forest behind, James felt a mixture of sadness and hope. The land would remain timeless and patient, but its lessons had been passed on to him. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the cabin disappearing in the distance, and for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of completion. He had faced challenges, embraced learning, and grown in ways he had never imagined possible. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, James carried the lessons of the forest into his everyday life. He moved with more patience, observed more carefully, and approached challenges with courage and calm. The stress of the city no longer controlled him. He had learned that peace is not a place, but a practice, a way of moving through life with awareness, respect, and openness to learning. And though he returned to the routines of work, people, and city noise, the memory of the cabin, the forest, and Ayanna's guidance remained vivid.